Good afternoon. My name is Klaidon Drury. I'm a freshman University Honors Program student. This is my project, The Role of Humor in Catch-22. The author of Catch-22, Joseph Heller, was born on May 1st, 1923 in Brooklyn, New York to Jewish immigrant parents. Joseph Heller joined the Army in 1941. His time in the armed forces greatly influenced his writing, eventually culminating in his magnum opus, Catch-22. Catch-22 chronicles the time in which Air Force bombardier Captain John Yossarian spends on the Mediterranean island of Pianosa during World War II. Captain Yossarian tires of his time in the armed forces as the colonels continuously raise the required number of missions the soldiers must fly to return home. Delving deeper into insanity, the deaths of his friends and excessive work push Yossarian to escape to Sweden by the end of the novel. Catch-22 uses humor to covertly communicate messages to the audience as they comprehend the tone of the novel. Heller uses confusing timelines, paradoxical situations, which are often humorous, and exaggerated characters in spite of the depressing situations to illustrate the confusing, absurd, and helpless nature of both war and humanity. Analyzing Catch-22 using humor theory discussed in John C. Meyer's Humor as a Double-Edged Sword helps to explain the function of Heller's writing to promote anti-war ideology. Now on to my argument. Catch-22's out of order and overall confusing timeline is highlighted so that the reader may feel as helpless and confused as Heller's characters while still finding the situation humorous. There are many instances where the reader can be easily confused. For example, in the second chapter of the book, Captain John Yossarian is having the mission situation explained to him by friend Doc Danica. Quote, 50 missions, Doc Danica told him, shaking his head. The colonel wants 50 missions. But I've only got 44, Yossarian said. Doc Danica was unmoved. He was a sad, bird-like man with a spatulate face and scrubbed, tapering features of a well-groomed rat. 50 missions, he repeated, still shaking his head. The colonel wants 50 missions. Unquote. This exchange would not be confusing to any reader if it wasn't for the constantly shifting timeline apparent in chapter 16, as Yossarian is listening to Hungry Joe, another friend. Quote, 40 missions, Hungry Joe announced readily in a voice lyrical with relief and elation. The colonel raised them again, unquote. The novel does not explicitly tell the reader when events are taking place. The reader must take context clues and referenced events into account when attempting to make sense of the story's plot. What is interesting about the story, however, is that it is intentionally confusing to the reader so that they may understand the confusion that the characters experience in the book, specifically relating to both the confusing nature and confusing purpose of war and the inability of the men to understand the reasoning behind any of the officers' decisions. Further on, the paradoxical situations in Catch-22 paint a picture of Heller's opinion on man's ability to distance himself and the absurdity that the military employs casually. The paradoxical Catch-22 is first explained to Yossarian by Doc Danica while the captain is requesting to be grounded. A Catch-22 has become a very famous phrase in popular culture which stems from Joseph Heller's novel. It is defined by Merriam-Webster Dictionary as a problematic situation for which the only solution is denied by a circumstance inherent in the problem or by a rule. Quote, there was only one catch, and that was Catch-22, which specified that a concern for one's own safety in the face of dangers that were real and immediate was the process of a rational mind, or was crazy and could be grounded. All he had to do was ask, and as soon as he did, he would no longer be crazy and would have to fly more missions. Or would be crazy to fly more missions, insane if he didn't. But if he was the same, sorry, if he was sane, then he'd have to fly them. If he flew them, he was crazy and didn't have to. But if he didn't want to, he was sane and had to. Yossarian was moved very deeply by the absolute simplicity of this clause of Catch-22 and let out a respectful whistle, end quote. The paradoxical Catch-22, which Heller describes, illustrates the absurdity of how the war is being run and the loopholes the leadership is taking, which the reader is undoubtedly spiteful of throughout the course of the novel. This paradoxical aspect of the novel is one that many readers will find themselves laughing at, knowing that the characters in the situation are utterly helpless. John C. Meyer's understanding of incongruity theory in humor is largely juxtaposition that provokes laughter. This describes a time which a situation seems normal, yet something is wrong. The level of cognition required to understand the absurdity in Catch-22 makes it a prime example of observing a work through the lens of incongruity theory. The role of humor in Catch-22 can be understood as differentiation, in which Joseph Heller creates wildly absurd situations to keep the reader on the opposing side of the absurdity of war. Joseph Heller seeks to divide the American public from the often romanticized type of warfare seen in the media. All in all, Joseph Heller's seminal 1961 novel, Catch-22, functions as a satirical comedy written to enforce anti-war messages. Throughout the novel, the many unrealistic characters in the depressing mood create an absurd and uncomfortable reading experience, which the war novel is known for. Heller's opinion of war is directly correlated to the plot of the book: absurd, complicated, and unnecessary. Heller uses humor to create a level of absurdity associated with the United States' activity in worldwide warfare, and thus produce a reader that wholly understands the messages that he is putting forward. This book, while being depressing, is still very humorous and has many morals that I think every person in the United States should share in regards to warfare. I think it is a good read that everyone should take the time for. Thank you.